The dust-laden wind swirled through Platteville, Colorado, carrying whispers of the auction that would take place at sundown, an auction where Beatrice Keller stood with her wrists bound, her scarred arms exposed to the jeering crowd. The year was 1876, and human dignity came with a price tag in the shadowy corners of the frontier, where law bent to the will of those with gold in their pockets and darkness in their hearts. The late August heat beat down mercilessly on the small mining town nestled in the Colorado Territory. Main Street bustled with the usual suspects, prospectors fresh from the claims, cattle drivers passing through, and locals tending to their daily business. But today carried a different energy. The auction block had been erected outside the Golden Nugget Saloon, and word had spread faster than wildfire across dry prairie grass. Beatrice kept her chin high, despite the humiliation burning through her veins. 23 years of life had taught her that survival meant never showing weakness, even when your insides were collapsing like a mine shaft during a tremor. Her chestnut hair hung in tangled waves down her back, once fine dress now torn and soiled from her journey. The thin cotton sleeves had been deliberately rolled up by her captor, exposing the web of scars that marked both forearms, evidence of her years in servitude to a cruel master back east. "Next up," bellowed the auctioneer, a portly man with a handlebar mustache and beady eyes, a fine working woman. "Bit damaged, as you can see, but strong back and healthy teeth. Starting bid at $20. The crowd murmured, some men stepping forward to get a better look, others hanging back with expressions ranging from disgusted to intrigued. Beatrice stared straight ahead, refusing to meet their gazing eyes. She'd been sold once before at 14 when her parents' debts had become too great. Never again would she allow herself to feel that same terror she had learned to turn fear into steel. "Look at them arms," someone called out. "What kind of trouble you been in, girl? $20 for damaged goods," another laughed. "I'd pay 10 at most." 15, called a voice from the back. Beatrice's eyes flicked toward the sound. A man stepped forward through the crowd, and the sea of onlookers parted for him. He moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, tall and broad-shouldered with a worn leather vest over a simple cotton shirt. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see a strong jawline covered in several days' worth of stubble. $15 from Mr. Blake Winters, the auctioneer announced, his tone suggesting this was an insultingly low offer. "Anyone care to top that?" 20, called another voice, a man Beatrice recognized as the owner of the town's largest saloon, known for the cruel way he treated his girls. The tall stranger stepped closer to the auction block, and now Beatrice could see his eyes clear blue and steady, assessing her not as merchandise but as a human being. It was a look she hadn't received in years. $30, he countered. 35, the saloon owner shot back. The stranger Blake stepped closer still, now directly in front of the auction block. For the first time his eyes met Beatrice's, and she saw something unexpected there. Not pity, not lust, but something like recognition. $50, he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet crowd. The saloon owner cursed under his breath but shook his head. No one else spoke up. 50 going once, the auctioneer called, surprise evident in his voice. 50 going twice, sold to Mr. Blake Winters for $50. As the transaction was completed, Beatrice steeled herself for whatever was to come. She had learned long ago that men who purchased women rarely had honorable intentions, no matter how kind their eyes might seem. Blake approached, handing over the money to the auctioneer before turning to Beatrice. He pulled a knife from his belt and she tensed, but he only used it to cut the ropes binding her wrists. "Can you walk?" he asked quietly. Beatrice nodded, rubbing her chafed wrists. "Where are you taking me?" "My ranch," he said simply. "It's about 5 miles outside town. I've got a wagon." He paused, looking at her arms, at the crisscross pattern of scars, both old and newer. His face remained impassive, but his next words changed everything. "Those scars," he said, voice low enough that only she could hear. "I see strength in them, not shame." Beatrice's practiced composure faltered for just a moment. In a world that had only seen the marks as evidence of her worthlessness, his words struck like lightning through parched earth. You don't know anything about me, she replied, her voice barely audible. No, he agreed, but I know something about scars. He led her through the dispersing crowd, some men casting envious or curious glances their way. Beatrice kept her head down, acutely aware of how exposed she felt with her scarred arms visible to all. When they reached a wagon hitched to two sturdy horses at the edge of town, Blake offered her his canteen. Drink, he said. It's a dusty ride to the ranch. She accepted it cautiously, taking small sips of the cool water while studying him from beneath lowered lashes. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or so, with the weathered look of someone who spent most days under the open sky. Why did you buy me? She finally asked as he helped her onto the wagon's seat. Blake climbed up beside her and took the reins. Because no one deserves to be sold like cattle. He clicked his tongue, and the horses started moving. And because Harlow would have worked you to death in that saloon of his within a year. They traveled in silence as the town of Platteville receded behind them. The landscape opened up rolling hills covered in prairie grass, dotted with scrubby trees and the occasional rocky outcropping. In the distance, the silhouette of mountains carved a jagged line against the horizon. I can't pay you back, Beatrice said finally, if that's what you're expecting. Blake's hands remained steady on the reins. I'm not expecting anything. Everyone expects something. He glanced at her then, those clear blue eyes piercing. My wife died 2 years ago, influenza. Left me with a ranch too big for one man and a daughter who's growing up without a mother's guidance. I need help running the house, cooking, and looking after Emma when I'm working the land. He paused. That's all I expect. Beatrice had heard such promises before. And when you decide you want more than housekeeping, his jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the stubble. That's not why I bought your contract, Miss Keller. You'll have your own room with a lock on the door. You're free to leave whenever you want, though I'd appreciate 2 weeks' notice to find replacement help. The sincerity in his voice made her want to believe him, but trust was a luxury Beatrice had forfeited years ago. Still, as the wagon rolled through the golden Colorado grasslands, she allowed herself a small breath of relief. Whatever awaited her at Blake Winter's ranch, it had to be better than what she'd left behind or what would have awaited her at Harlow's saloon. The sun was beginning its descent toward the distant mountains when Blake turned the wagon onto a narrow dirt road. After another mile, a homestead came into view, a sturdy 2-story house built of local timber and stone, a large barn, corral, and several outbuildings. Smoke curled from the chimney, and as they drew closer, Beatrice saw a small figure dart out the front door. Pa, you're back. A girl of about 8 years came running toward the wagon, her dark blonde hair streaming behind her in 2 braids. She stopped short when she spotted Beatrice. Who's this? Blake brought the wagon to a halt and set the brake. Emma, this is Miss Keller. She's going to help us around the house. He jumped down from the wagon and lifted his daughter into a quick embrace before turning to offer Beatrice his hand. After a moment's hesitation, she took it, allowing him to help her down. Miss Keller, this is my daughter, Emma. The girl studied Beatrice with undisguised curiosity. Her eyes, the same clear blue as her father's, widened slightly when she noticed the scars on Beatrice's arms, but she didn't comment. Instead, she asked, Can you cook? Pa burns everything except coffee. Despite everything, Beatrice felt a small smile tug at her lips. I can cook. Thank goodness, Emma said with the dramatic relief only a child could muster. I was starting to think I'd have to eat charred biscuits for the rest of my life. Emma, Blake said with gentle reproach, though a smile played at the corners of his mouth. Why don't you go tell Mrs. Jennings that I'm back and she can head home? As the girl dashed back to the house, Blake turned to Beatrice. Mrs. Jennings from the neighboring farm comes by to watch Emma when I need to go to town. She's a good woman, but she's getting on in years. He gestured toward the house. Come on. I'll show you where you'll be staying. The interior of the home was surprisingly well kept for a widower and his young daughter. Simple but sturdy furniture filled the rooms, and though lacking a woman's decorative touches, everything was clean and organized. Emma's room is here, Blake said, indicating a door off the main living area. Mine's at the end of the hall. This will be yours. He opened a door to reveal a modest bedroom with a narrow bed, dresser, small writing desk, and a window that looked out over the prairie to the east. True to his word, the door had a simple bolt, but it was something. Bathrooms down the hall. We have running water. I put in the pipes myself last year. The kitchen's through there. He paused, seemingly at a loss for what else to say. I imagine you'd like to rest after everything. Supper's in about an hour, but there's no obligation to join us tonight. Beatrice stepped into the bedroom, running her fingers along the simple quilt covering the bed. A real bed in a real room with a door she could lock. It was more than she'd had in years. Thank you, she said quietly. I'll join you for supper. It's the least I can do. Blake nodded, hesitating in the doorway. There are some clothes in the dresser. They belong to my wife, Charlotte. They might be a bit big on you, but they're clean. Feel free to use whatever fits. He cleared his throat. I'll leave you to get settled. After he left, closing the door behind him, Beatrice sank onto the edge of the bed. Her hands trembled as the events of the day caught up with her. She'd been so certain that today would mark the beginning of another nightmare, but instead she found herself in this clean room, offered kindness by a stranger who claimed to want nothing from her but honest work. She didn't trust it, couldn't trust it, not yet. But as she opened the dresser drawers to find neatly folded dresses, blouses, and skirts, she allowed herself a moment of hope, a dangerous feeling she'd learned to suppress long ago. In the simple wash basin by the window, she cleaned away the dust of travel and the humiliation of the auction block. The cool water was a balm against her skin, and when she changed into one of Charlotte Winter's dresses, a simple blue calico that hung a bit loose around her waist, but otherwise fit well enough, she felt something like dignity return. For the first time that day, Beatrice allowed herself to really look at her arms. The scars were a road map of her past, some from punishment, others from her own hand during the darkest times when pain seemed the only thing she could control. Blake Winters had seen them and spoken of strength, not shame. Was it possible he meant it? An hour later, she made her way to the kitchen, where Emma was setting the table and Blake was removing a pot from the stove. I was just about to call you, he said, looking up. Something flickered across his face when he saw her in his late wife's dress, but it passed quickly. Hope you like beef stew. It's one of the few things I can manage without ruining. I helped, Emma said proudly. I cut the carrots. The domesticity of the scene struck Beatrice as surreal after the events of the day. Here she was, sitting down to dinner with a man who had purchased her at auction and his daughter, as if this were a normal arrangement. The stew was simple but hearty, served with thick slices of bread that Blake admitted came from the town bakery. I've tried making bread, he said with a self-deprecating smile. Emma used the results as building blocks. They were too hard to eat but perfect for building a fort, the girl explained seriously. Beatrice found herself smiling again, an unfamiliar sensation after so long. I can teach you to make bread, she offered. It's not difficult once you know the trick of it. Emma's face lit up. Really? Can we start tomorrow? If your father has the ingredients, Blake nodded. We keep the pantry well stocked. The winters here can be harsh and it pays to be prepared. He hesitated before adding, I should mention the terms of your employment, Miss Keller. Employment, not ownership. The distinction wasn't lost on Beatrice. You'll receive wages $15 a month plus room and board. Your duties would include cooking, cleaning, laundry, and looking after Emma when I'm working the ranch. He glanced at his daughter. She's in school most weekdays during term time, but someone needs to be here when she returns. $15 a month was a fair wage for a housekeeper, more than fair, considering her circumstances. That's generous, Beatrice said cautiously. It's what the job is worth, Blake replied simply. We can discuss any adjustments after you've been here a month if you decide to stay. If you decide to stay. Again, the implication that she had a choice struck her. After dinner, Emma insisted on showing Beatrice her treasured collection of books and the rag doll her mother had made her before she died. The girl chattered easily, seemingly unbothered by the presence of a stranger in their home. Later, when Emma had been tucked into bed, Beatrice found Blake on the porch, smoking a cigarette and gazing out at the darkening land. She's a wonderful child, Beatrice said, wrapping a shawl she'd found in the bedroom closet around her shoulders against the evening chill. Blake extinguished his cigarette. "She's the best part of me," he glanced at Beatrice. "I want to be clear about something, Miss Keller. What happened in town today, the auction, it wasn't right. I don't believe people should be bought and sold no matter the circumstances." "Yet you bought me," she pointed out. "I bought your contract to give you a choice." He turned to face her fully. "The law may not recognize it, but as far as I'm concerned, you're a free woman working for wages, not an indentured servant. If you want to leave tomorrow, I won't stop you. I'll even give you enough money to get wherever you want to go." Beatrice studied him in the fading light. "Why would you do that? You don't know me. I could be anyone, a thief, a murderer." A corner of his mouth lifted. "Are you a thief or a murderer?" "No," she admitted. "But I'm not the innocent young woman you might think either. I don't expect you to be innocent." His eyes dropped briefly to her scarred arms before meeting her gaze again. "We all carry our pasts with us, Miss Keller. The question is whether we let them determine our futures." The philosophical turn surprised her. "And what about your past, Mr. Winters? What are you carrying?" Something darkened in his expression. "That's a conversation for another time." He straightened up from where he'd been leaning against the porch railing. "It's getting late, and I imagine you're exhausted. I'll be up at Dawn Ranch. Work waits for no one, but you're welcome to sleep in tomorrow. Consider it a day to get your bearings." Beatrice nodded, suddenly aware of how bone-tired she truly was. "Thank you for everything." As she turned to go inside, his voice stopped her. "Miss Keller," she looked back at him. "Whatever put those scars on your arms, it doesn't define you here. Not to me and not to Emma." Beatrice didn't trust herself to respond. She simply nodded again and went inside, making her way back to the bedroom that was now hers. After locking the door, a precaution born of hard experience rather than any specific fear of Blake Winters, she changed into a cotton nightgown from the dresser and slipped between clean sheets. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Beatrice fell asleep without fear of what the morning would bring. The next few days established a rhythm that was both foreign and comforting to Beatrice. She rose early, preparing breakfast for Blake before he headed out to work the ranch and getting Emma ready for her day. The girl attended a small schoolhouse about a mile away, riding there on her pony when the weather was good. True to her word, Beatrice taught Emma to make bread, the two of them laughing together as flour dusted their noses and cheeks. She found the pantry well stocked, the house in decent order, and gradually began adding her own touches, arranging wildflowers in mason jars, organizing the kitchen cupboards more efficiently, mending clothes that had been set aside for repair. Blake was often gone from dawn until dusk, working with his small herd of cattle or tending to the endless tasks a ranch demanded. When he returned in the evenings, dusty and tired, something in his expression softened at the sight of a proper meal on the table and his daughter chattering happily about her day. On the fourth evening, as Beatrice was washing dishes after supper, Blake joined her in the kitchen, drying towel in hand. "You don't have to do that," she said, surprised. "My mother taught me that those who don't help with cleaning don't deserve to eat," he replied, taking a wet plate from her hands. "Besides, it goes faster with two." They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes before he spoke again. "Emma's taken a shine to you." Beatrice smiled despite herself. "She's easy to like. You've raised her well, especially under the circumstances." "I've done my best." He stacked a dried plate with the others. "She doesn't remember much about Charlotte. She was only 6 when the influenza took her. Sometimes I worry she's forgetting the little she does recall. That must be difficult for you both." Blake nodded, his eyes distant. "Charlotte was a good woman, patient, kind, better than I deserved." He shook himself slightly, as if dispelling unwelcome thoughts. "Emma needs a feminine influence, someone to teach her the things I can't." "I'm not sure I'm the best example of womanhood," Beatrice said wryly, indicating her scarred arms, visible below the rolled sleeves of her dress. Blake's expression grew serious. "Those scars tell me you've survived something most wouldn't. That's exactly the kind of strength I want my daughter to learn." The sincerity in his voice made Beatrice look away, uncomfortable with the unfamiliar feeling of being valued rather than judged for her past. "May I ask how you came to be at that auction?" Blake asked quietly. You don't have to tell me if you'd rather not. Beatrice was silent for a long moment, her hands stilling in the soapy water. No one had asked about her past in years. People simply made assumptions based on her scars and circumstances. I was born in Pennsylvania, she finally said. My father was a merchant who made some bad investments. When I was 14, he sold me as an indentured servant to pay his debts. The memory still stung, though she'd long ago stopped hoping for her parents' love or rescue. The man who bought my contract owned a textile mill. He had particular ideas about discipline. Blake's hands tightened on the dish he was drying, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue at her own pace. I worked in his household for 8 years. His wife died in my 3rd year there, and after that, she trailed off, the implication clear. I ran away 6 months ago. Made it as far as Missouri before I was caught by a bounty hunter. Mr. Harrison, my former master, had sold my contract to recoup his loss, and the new owner decided to bring me west to sell at a profit. Her laugh held no humor. I suppose I should thank him. If he'd kept me in Pennsylvania, I'd still be there. Blake set the towel down. No one has the right to own another person, contract or no. The law disagrees with you. The law isn't always right. There was a hard edge to his voice that made Beatrice look up in surprise. I fought in the war, Miss Keller, saw what slavery did to this country, to human beings treated like property. When it ended, I swore I'd never stand by while someone was bought and sold if I could help it. The revelation clicked another piece of the puzzle into place. Is that why you were at the auction? He nodded, a grin set to his jaw. I go whenever I hear one's happening in town. Can't always afford to buy contracts, but I try to at least bid enough to drive up the price, make it less profitable for the sellers. A wry smile touched his lips. This time I got lucky, had just sold some cattle and had cash on hand. And what happens to the people whose contracts you buy? I tear them up. He shrugged at her startled expression. Like I said, you're free to go whenever you choose. The others I've helped have mostly moved on. I gave them enough money for train fare to wherever they wanted to start fresh. One man works over at the Johnson place now, married their daughter last spring. Beatrice studied him, still searching for the angle, the hidden motive. And you do this out of, what, charity, a savior complex? Blake's expression darkened slightly. I do it because it's right, no more complicated than that. The simplicity of his answer struck her. In Beatrice's experience, men's motives were rarely simple and never selfless. Yet everything about Blake Winters suggested he might be the exception that proved the rule. Well, she said finally, returning to the dishes, I'm grateful, whatever your reasons. As the days turned into weeks, Beatrice found herself settling into life at the Winters Ranch with surprising ease. The work was demanding but satisfying, so different from the degrading labor of her past. Here, she was treated with respect, her efforts appreciated rather than expected. Emma continued to blossom under Beatrice's guidance, eagerly learning to sew, cook, and manage the household accounts. The girl had a quick mind and a kind heart, traits Beatrice recognized as coming from her father. Blake himself remained something of an enigma. He worked from sunup to sundown, quiet but not unfriendly, occasionally joining their conversations at dinner with insights that revealed an educated mind behind his cowboy exterior. Sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, not the predatory look she'd grown accustomed to from men, but something more contemplative. The first test of their arrangement came in late September, when Blake announced he needed to drive some cattle to Denver and would be gone for nearly a week. Will you be all right here with Emma? He asked Beatrice the evening before his departure, concern evident in his voice. Mrs. Jennings can come stay if you'd prefer not to be alone. We'll be fine, Beatrice assured him, touched by his consideration. Emma and I will manage. Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed, Blake called Beatrice out to the porch. The autumn air held a chill that promised winter wasn't far off, and the stars spread across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. I have something for you, he said, holding out a small cloth pouch. Beatrice accepted it cautiously. Inside, she found a key. It's for the strongbox in my bedroom, Blake explained. There's emergency money inside, about $200. If anything happens while I'm gone, you take Emma and that money and get somewhere safe." The trust implicit in the gesture left Beatrice momentarily speechless. "I thank you." "Nothing will happen, but thank you," he nodded, gazing out at the darkened landscape. "I've also left papers in there. If something happens to me on the trail, don't say that," Beatrice interrupted, surprising herself with how much the thought distressed her. A small smile touched Blake's lips. "It's just being practical, Miss Keller. Ranch life is full of risks." He continued more seriously, "If something happens to me, those papers grant you guardianship of Emma until she comes of age, along with ownership of this ranch." Beatrice stared at him in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "You barely know me." "I know enough," he said simply. "Emma trusts you, I trust you. There's no one else I'd rather see raising my daughter if I can't." "But she gestured helplessly at herself, at the scars visible on her arms in the moonlight. "You're exactly who I want looking after Emma if need be," Blake said firmly. "A woman who's faced hardship and survived, who understands the value of kindness because she's known its absence." He looked directly into her eyes. "Do you accept this responsibility?" The weight of what he was asking settled over Beatrice. This man was entrusting her not only with his most precious possession, his child, but with his legacy, his home. It was a level of trust she'd never experienced. "I accept," she said quietly, "but you'd better come back, Blake Winters. That girl needs her father." His expression softened at her use of his given name, the first time she'd addressed him so informally. "I plan to," he promised. "Just wanted things settled, just in case." The week Blake was gone passed both slowly and quickly for Beatrice. She and Emma fell into their own routine, the girl helping more around the house and proudly taking on the responsibility of feeding the chickens and collecting eggs each morning. They rode together in the evenings by lamplight, worked on Emma's schoolwork, and even rode out one afternoon to visit Mrs. Jennings, who seemed pleased by the changes in the Winters household since Beatrice's arrival. On the fifth day, as Beatrice was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, she spotted a group of riders approaching from the east, 3 men, moving with purpose toward the ranch. Heart racing, she called Emma in from where she'd been playing and locked the doors, positioning herself at the window with the shotgun Blake had shown her how to use, just in case. The men reined in their horses in the yard, and the leader, a burly man with a pockmarked face, called out, "Hello, the house. Anybody home?" Beatrice remained silent, watching. They didn't look like ordinary travelers seeking directions or water. "Come on out, girl," the man called again. "We know you're in there. Harrison sent us all the way from Pennsylvania to collect his property." Ice flooded Beatrice's veins. Harrison, after all this time, he was still hunting her. These must be bounty hunters hired to bring her back. "Who are those men, Miss Beatrice?" Emma whispered, eyes wide with fear. "Bad men," Beatrice answered honestly. "Go to your father's room and get the strongbox from under his bed. Use the key I gave you, then go out the back window and run to Mrs. Jennings's place as fast as you can." "But what about you?" Beatrice managed a smile she didn't feel. "I'll be right behind you. Now go, quickly and quietly." As Emma slipped away, Beatrice steadied the shotgun. She wasn't going back to Harrison, she'd die first, but she also wasn't going to shoot unless absolutely necessary. These men might be doing a job they considered legal, even if it was morally reprehensible. "We're coming in if you don't come out," the leader threatened, dismounting, "and it'll go harder on you if we have to drag you out." Beatrice took a deep breath. "I have a loaded shotgun pointed at the door," she called out. "This is private property and you're trespassing. I suggest you leave." The men exchanged glances, clearly not expecting armed resistance. "Now listen here," the leader said, his tone changing to something oilier. "We're not looking to hurt anybody. We're just doing a job. Mr. Harrison is offering a reward for your return, $50. We can split it with you, give you $25 if you come peacefully." "I'm not for sale," Beatrice replied, anger replacing fear. "Not to Harrison, not to you, not to anyone. This is my home and I'm not leaving." "My home." The words surprised her even as she spoke them, but she realized they were true. In just a few short weeks, this ranch and the people in it had become more home to her than anywhere she'd lived in years. "Your home," the man laughed. You're a runaway servant with a contract. You don't own anything. My contract was purchased and terminated by Blake Winters, Beatrice said, fabricating the termination but hoping the men wouldn't know the difference. I'm legally employed here as housekeeper and nanny to his daughter. If you lay a hand on me, you'll be kidnapping a free woman. This gave them pause, the men conferring in low voices. Beatrice used the moment to check that Emma had indeed escaped through the back. To her relief, the girl was nowhere in sight, hopefully already running toward Mrs. Jennings's farm a mile away. We're going to need to see this terminated contract, the leader finally said. Until then, you're still Harrison's property as far as the law is concerned. Beatrice's grip tightened on the shotgun. The paperwork is in town with Mr. Winters's lawyer. He's expected back today or tomorrow. You're welcome to wait for him in Platteville. It was a gamble. Blake might not return for another day or more, but the suggestion that legal proof existed and that Blake would be returning soon might be enough to make them reconsider. The standoff continued for another tense hour, with the men alternating between threats and cajoling promises. Beatrice remained firm, the shotgun never wavering from the door, though her arms ached with the strain. Just when she thought they might force their way in regardless, the sound of approaching horses reached them. The bounty hunters turned, and Beatrice risked a glance out the window to see Blake riding in, flanked by 3 other men she recognized from neighboring ranches. Relief washed through her so strongly she nearly dropped the shotgun. Outside, Blake pulled his horse to a stop, his expression hardening as he took in the scene. "Something I can help you gentlemen with?" His tone was mild, but Beatrice could hear the steel beneath it. "This doesn't concern you," the leader began, but Blake cut him off. "Anything happening on my land concerns me." He dismounted smoothly, hand resting casually near his holstered revolver. The men with him followed suit, creating a line of imposing figures. "Especially when it involves frightening the women under my protection." The leader reassessed the situation, clearly not liking the odds. "We're here on legitimate business. The woman in that house is a runaway servant with an outstanding contract to a Mr. Harrison of Pennsylvania." Blake's expression didn't change. "Miss Keller is employed by me. Any prior contracts were settled when I purchased and terminated them. You got proof of that termination?" "I do." Blake nodded to one of the men with him, who produced a folded document from inside his coat. "Tom here is the county clerk. He's got the filed paperwork right there, witnessed and legal." Beatrice stared in shock. Blake must have filed the termination before leaving for Denver, anticipating something like this might happen. The bounty hunter examined the document suspiciously, but couldn't deny the official seals and signatures. "This could be forged," he muttered, but without conviction. "You're welcome to take it up with the territorial court," Blake said evenly. "In the meantime, you're trespassing on my property and threatening my housekeeper. I suggest you leave before things get unpleasant." The implied threat, backed by 4 armed men, was enough. The bounty hunters retreated to their horses, the leader pausing to spit on the ground before mounting up. "Harrison won't be happy," he warned. "Harrison can come see me himself if he's got complaints," Blake replied. "I'll be happy to discuss his business practices with him, face to face." Only after the men had ridden away did Blake hurry to the house, calling Beatrice's name. She unlocked the door, the shotgun finally lowered, and nearly collapsed into his arms with relief. "Emma," she gasped. "I sent her to Mrs. Jennings." "She's safe," Blake assured her, his arms steadying her. "We passed Mrs. Jennings's husband on the road. He was riding to town to get the sheriff after Emma arrived with quite a tale to tell." Beatrice nodded, the adrenaline that had sustained her finally draining away. "You came back early." "Got lucky with good weather and strong cattle," he said, his eyes scanning her face with concern. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "No, I'm fine, just shaken." She looked at the document the county clerk still held. "Is that real, the termination of my contract?" Blake nodded, guiding her to a chair. "I had it drawn up before I left, meant to show you when I got back as a surprise." His mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Thought it might make a nice 1-month anniversary gift. Officially, you're a free woman, Beatrice Keller, have been for 2 weeks now." The use of her first name, coupled with the magnitude of what he'd done, brought tears to Beatrice's eyes. "Why didn't you tell me? Wanted it to be official first," he said simply. "And I wanted you to stay because you chose to, not because you felt obligated by any legal document one way or the other." One of the other men cleared his throat. "We should probably head out and make sure those fellows are really leaving the territory," he suggested. "Blake, you good here?" Blake nodded gratefully to his neighbors. "Thanks for riding with me, boys. I owe you." After they'd left, promising to send word once Emma was safely back home, Blake sat across from Beatrice at the kitchen table. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have anticipated something like this might happen." Beatrice shook her head. "You couldn't have known Harrison would track me this far." She hesitated, then asked, "How did you know to come back with reinforcements?" "I didn't," he admitted. "Tom and the others were just riding back with me to help unload some supplies I purchased in Denver." He ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly tired. "But I've been worried about something like this since I bought your contract. Men like Harrison don't give up easily on what they consider their property." "No," Beatrice agreed softly. "They don't." Blake reached across the table, hesitating before gently taking her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her beyond helping her on and off wagons or passing dishes at dinner. "You're safe now," he said. "Legally free. If you want to move on, start fresh somewhere Harrison wouldn't think to look, I understand. I can give you money for train fare, references for work." Beatrice looked down at their joined hands, his calloused and strong around her smaller one. "Is that what you want, for me to leave?" "No," Blake said so quickly and firmly that her eyes shot up to his face. He looked almost embarrassed by his vehemence. "No," he repeated more calmly. "Emma adores you, and he stopped, seeming to search for the right words. "I've grown accustomed to having you here. The house feels like a home again." It wasn't quite a declaration, but Beatrice felt something warm unfurl in her chest nonetheless. "Then I'd like to stay," she said simply. "If that's still all right." "More than all right." The relief in Blake's eyes was unmistakable. "It's what I was hoping you'd say." That evening, after Emma had been brought home and the excitement explained in terms that wouldn't frighten her further, Blake found Beatrice on the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the autumn chill. "Emma's asleep," he said, joining her at the railing. "She thinks you're quite the hero, facing down those bad men with a shotgun." Beatrice smiled despite the lingering tension of the day. "I was terrified," she admitted, "not for myself so much as for her. That's what makes you a hero in her eyes and in mine." Blake's voice was soft in the darkness. "You put her safety above your own." They stood in companionable silence for a while, looking out at the star-strewn sky. Finally, Beatrice spoke. "You said your wife was a good woman, that she was patient and kind." Blake nodded, his profile silvered by moonlight. "She was." "What was she like? Really like, I mean. Emma talks about her sometimes, but children see their parents differently." A small smile touched Blake's lips. "Charlotte was determined, stubborn even. When she set her mind to something, there was no changing it." His voice held fondness rather than regret. "She was the one who wanted to move west to start the ranch. I was content working as a carpenter back in Illinois, but she had bigger dreams." "She sounds remarkable." She was. He glanced at Beatrice. "She would have liked you, I think. She valued honesty and courage above all else." Beatrice wasn't sure how to respond to that. After a moment, she changed the subject slightly. "You mentioned fighting in the war. Which side?" "Union," Blake replied. "Enlisted in '62 when I was 20, fought until Appomattox." His expression grew distant. "Saw things no man should see, did things no man should have to do." He looked down at his hands. "But I believed in the cause, still do. Freedom isn't just a word, it's a right every person deserves." Beatrice studied him in the moonlight. "Is that why you helped me? Because of the war?" Blake considered this. "Partly," he acknowledged, "but it was more than that." He turned to face her fully. "When I saw you on that auction block, with your head held high despite everything, I saw someone who refused to be broken by circumstance. I admired that." His voice softened. "And when I saw those scars on your arms, I recognized something in them, not the pain that put them there, but the strength it took to survive it." The sincerity in his voice made Beatrice's throat tighten. No one had ever seen her scars as anything but marks of shame, evidence of her damaged goods status. "My scars aren't just from Harrison," she admitted quietly. "Some I put there myself in the darkest times, when pain was the only thing I could control." Blake nodded, understanding rather than judgment in his eyes. "We all find ways to survive." After a moment's hesitation, he unbuttoned his shirt cuff and rolled up his left sleeve, revealing a long, jagged scar that ran from wrist to elbow. "Gettysburg," he said simply. "Bayonet." Doctor wanted to take the arm, but a nurse convinced him to try saving it. Beatrice reached out instinctively, her fingers hovering above the scar before she caught herself and pulled back. Blake caught her hand gently. "It's all right," he said softly. "You can touch it." Hesitantly, she let her fingertips trace the raised line of scar tissue. "Does it still hurt in cold weather or when it's going to rain?" His voice had roughened slightly. "But it reminds me I'm alive when so many others aren't." Beatrice nodded, understanding completely. "Sometimes I think our scars are just the places where we've been broken and mended, stronger at the seams but different than before." Blake's fingers closed around hers, still resting on his arm. "I think you might be right." Their eyes met in the moonlight, and something shifted between them, a recognition, a possibility. For a breathless moment, Beatrice thought he might kiss her, and more surprising still, she realized she wanted him to. Instead, Blake gently released her hand. "It's getting late," he said, his voice still carrying that roughened edge. "And it's been a long day." Beatrice nodded, both relieved and disappointed. "Good night, Blake." "Good night, Beatrice." He hesitated, then added softly, "I'm glad you're staying." As autumn deepened into winter, the dynamic between Blake and Beatrice continued to evolve. There were more moments like that night on the porch, quiet conversations, lingering glances, hands that touched a moment longer than necessary when passing objects. But neither of them crossed the invisible line that separated employer and employee, despite the growing evidence that both might welcome such a crossing. The first snow fell in early November, transforming the ranch into a wonderland of white that delighted Emma and kept Blake busy ensuring the cattle and horses were properly sheltered and fed. Beatrice threw herself into preparing for the coming holidays, determined to make Christmas special for Emma. On Thanksgiving, Blake invited several neighboring families to dinner, the first real social gathering at the ranch since Charlotte's death, he confided to Beatrice. She spent days preparing, baking pies and bread, planning a meal that would showcase her skills while making everyone feel welcome. The dinner was a success, the house filled with warmth and laughter that seemed to chase away the last lingering ghosts of sadness. Beatrice noticed the approving glances exchanged among the wives when they saw how she had transformed the once sparse home into something inviting and comfortable. More surprising were the knowing looks they cast between her and Blake, whenever they interacted, looks that suggested the neighbors saw something developing that the principals themselves had yet to acknowledge. As December arrived with deeper snows and shorter days, life at the ranch took on a cozy rhythm. Evenings were spent by the fire, with Blake teaching Emma to play checkers while Beatrice sewed or mended. Sometimes Blake would read aloud from one of his books. He had quite a collection. Another surprise in this man of seemingly simple tastes, while Beatrice and Emma worked on a quilt they were making together. It was during one such evening, with Emma already in bed and the fire burning low, that Blake finally broached the subject that had been growing between them. "Beatrice," he began, setting aside his book, "there's something I've been meaning to discuss with you." She looked up from her sewing, heart suddenly racing. "Yes." Blake leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. "You've been here almost 4 months now." "Has it been that long already?" she asked, though she knew precisely how long it had been. He nodded. "In that time, you've transformed this house into a home. Emma is happier than I've seen her since her mother died. And he paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I find myself looking forward to coming in from work, knowing you'll be here." Beatrice set down her sewing. "I've been happy here," she said simply. "Happier than I can remember being in a very long time." Blake's expression softened. "I'm glad." He took a deep breath. "The thing is, Beatrice, I find myself thinking about you in ways that go beyond employer and housekeeper." The directness of his statement both thrilled and frightened her. Part of her had been hoping for this conversation, another part had been dreading it. "Blake," she began carefully, "I don't know if I can be what you're looking for." "What do you think I'm looking for?" she gestured vaguely. "A proper wife, someone without my history." Blake's expression grew serious. "I'm not looking for proper, Beatrice, I'm looking for real." He moved to sit beside her on the sofa, close but not touching. "I know your past hasn't been easy, mine hasn't been either in different ways. But I find myself thinking more about the future these days than the past." Beatrice looked down at her hands, at the scars visible on her wrists below her sleeves. "What if I can't give you what you want? What if I'm too damaged?" With gentle fingers, Blake tilted her chin up until she met his gaze. "You are not damaged, Beatrice Keller. You're the strongest person I've ever met." His voice was low and intense. "And all I want is a chance to see if what I'm feeling, what I think you might be feeling too, could grow into something lasting." The sincerity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. "And what exactly are you feeling?" she whispered. Instead of answering with words, Blake leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When she didn't, he pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. It wasn't Beatrice's first kiss. Harrison and others had taken those against her will, but it was the first that made her heart race with something other than fear. Blake's lips were warm and firm against hers, respectful yet unmistakably passionate. When he started to pull away, she surprised herself by leaning forward to prolong the contact, her hand coming up to rest against his chest. When they finally broke apart, Blake rested his forehead against hers, his breathing slightly uneven. "That," he said softly, "is what I'm feeling." Beatrice couldn't help the small laugh that escaped her, part joy and part disbelief. "I thought it was just me," she admitted. "I told myself it was foolish to think you might see me as anything, but I've seen you as a woman, a remarkable, beautiful woman since the moment I met you," Blake interrupted. "But I didn't want to pressure you, to make you feel obligated in any way because of your situation." "And now?" she asked, her heart still racing from the kiss. "Now I'm asking if you might consider a change in our arrangement." His thumb traced gently along her cheekbone. "Not as my housekeeper, but as my partner, my wife eventually, if that's something you might want, wife." The word both thrilled and terrified Beatrice. "Blake, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to answer now," he assured her. "Take all the time you need. I just wanted you to know how I feel, that I care for you deeply, that I think we could build something good together if you're willing." Beatrice studied his face in the firelight, this man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and valued her anyway, who had given her freedom, a home, and now was offering his heart. "I care for you too," she admitted quietly. "More than I thought possible. And Emma, I love her as if she were my own." She hesitated. "But marriage is a big step. I would need time." Blake's smile was understanding. "Time is something we have plenty of." He took her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "All I'm asking is that you think about it." "I will," Beatrice promised. And as Blake walked her to her bedroom door that night, kissing her once more with gentle reverence before bidding her good night, she found herself already thinking of little else. Christmas came, bringing with it a festivity Beatrice hadn't experienced since childhood. She and Emma decorated the house with pine boughs and red ribbons, baked cookies shaped like stars, and secretly worked on gifts for Blake. The holiday itself was simple but joyful. Blake presented Emma with a beautifully carved wooden horse he'd been working on for months, and Beatrice with a delicate silver locket. "It was my mother's," he explained as he fastened it around her neck, his fingers warm against her skin. "I thought you might like to put a picture of Emma inside, and maybe someday other family members too." The implication wasn't lost on Beatrice, nor on the beaming Emma, who had clearly been let in on the secret of Blake's feelings. The girl had taken to hugging Beatrice more frequently and asking pointed questions about whether she planned to stay forever. As winter settled in earnest over the Colorado territory, Blake and Beatrice's relationship continued to deepen. They still maintained separate bedrooms. Propriety demanded as much, especially with Emma in the house, but their evenings often ended with increasingly passionate kisses in the shadowed hallway. Blake never pushed for more, seeming content to let Beatrice set the pace of their growing intimacy. For Beatrice, each kiss, each gentle touch, was an exercise in trust, in believing that not all men were like Harrison, that physical affection could bring joy rather than pain. Blake's patience as she navigated these new waters only increased her growing love for him. By February, as the worst of winter began to ease, Beatrice had made her decision. One evening, after Emma had gone to bed, she found Blake in his small study going over the ranch accounts. "Do you have a minute?" she asked from the doorway. He looked up immediately, setting aside his ledger. "For you, always." Beatrice entered, closing the door behind her, a boldness that made Blake's eyebrows rise slightly. She crossed to his desk, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. "I've been thinking," she began, "about what you asked at Christmas about us." Blake nodded, his expression carefully neutral though his eyes betrayed his hope. And I think," Beatrice said, moving around the desk until she stood before him, "that I would very much like to be your wife." She took a deep breath. "If you still want me." Blake stood so quickly his chair nearly toppled backward. "If I still Beatrice, there is nothing I want more in this world." His hands framed her face with exquisite tenderness. "Are you sure, truly sure?" In answer, Beatrice rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his, pouring all the certainty she felt into the kiss. Blake responded with equal fervor, his arms encircling her waist to draw her closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Blake rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered. "I think I've loved you since I saw you standing on that auction block, refusing to let them break your spirit." "And I love you," Beatrice replied, the words feeling both foreign and absolutely right on her tongue, "for seeing strength where others saw only shame. For giving me a home when I had none, for waiting until I was ready." Blake kissed her again, more gently this time. "I would have waited forever." They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the town church, with Emma serving as Beatrice's attendant and the neighbors they'd hosted at Thanksgiving filling the pews. The minister spoke of new beginnings and God's grace, words that resonated deeply with both bride and groom. That night, as Blake carried her across the threshold of the bedroom they would now share, Beatrice felt the last of her fears melt away in the face of his obvious devotion. Their coming together as husband and wife was tender and passionate by turns, Blake's patience and care transforming what had once been an act of subjugation in Beatrice's experience into something beautiful and sacred. "You are my miracle," he whispered against her hair as they lay tangled together afterward. "My second chance at happiness." Beatrice pressed a kiss to his chest right above his steadily beating heart. "And you are mine." Spring came to Colorado in a riot of wildflowers and new growth, mirroring the blossoming of the winter's household. Emma thrived with 2 loving parents. Blake's business prospered with the addition of some dairy cows Beatrice suggested. And Beatrice herself discovered talents she'd never had the opportunity to develop a head for business that complemented Blake's practical ranching knowledge. A gift for gardening that soon had the kitchen garden producing vegetables enough to sell the excess in town. In late May, as the last threat of frost passed, Beatrice confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks: she was expecting a child. Blake's joy at the news was matched only by Emma's excitement at the prospect of a sibling. "A brother or sister," the girl exclaimed, dancing around the kitchen. "Can I help name the baby? Can it sleep in my room?" "The baby will have its own crib in our room at first," Beatrice explained, laughing at Emma's enthusiasm, "but you can certainly help with names." Blake, who had been watching this exchange with a smile that threatened to split his face, came to wrap his arms around Beatrice from behind, his hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "I never thought I could be this happy again," he murmured against her ear. "Thank you for giving us this gift." As her pregnancy progressed, Beatrice sometimes caught herself marveling at how dramatically her life had changed in just 1 year. From a woman being sold on an auction block to the beloved wife of a respected rancher, mother to a stepdaughter who adored her, with another child growing beneath her heart. The scars on her arms remained, but they had faded in significance, reminders of where she had been, not limitations on where she could go. That fall, as the aspen trees turned golden and the first hints of winter returned to the air, Beatrice gave birth to a son they named Samuel, after Blake's father. The boy was strong and healthy, with his father's blue eyes and what promised to be his mother's determined spirit. "He's perfect," Blake whispered, cradling his son with the careful hands of a man accustomed to handling precious things. Just like his mother, Beatrice smiled tiredly from the bed. "Hardly perfect," she demurred, though the old self-doubt carried no real weight anymore. "But loved. Very much loved. That's what matters most," Blake agreed, sitting beside her and arranging little Samuel so Emma could see her brother's face more clearly. "Love is what makes a family, what heals old wounds, what builds something lasting out of broken pieces." As Beatrice looked at the three faces beside her, Blake's strong and tender, Emma's curious and kind, baby Samuel's new and full of possibility, she knew with absolute certainty that he was right. The scars of her past would always be part of her story, but they were no longer its defining feature. Instead, they were simply the map that had led her here, to this moment, to this family, to this love. "I see strength in them, not shame," Blake had said that first day, looking at her scarred arms on the auction block. Words that had changed everything, that had seen possibility where others saw only damage. Words that had recognized the truth Beatrice herself was only now fully understanding, that sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the deepest wounds, and the strongest hearts are those that have been broken and mended back together. As the first snow of winter began to fall outside their window, Beatrice Winters held her family close and silently thanked whatever providence had brought her to this place, this man, this life. The journey had been long and often painful, but as Blake's arm tightened around her shoulders and Emma carefully stroked her baby brother's cheek, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty. Every step had been worth it. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges to the Winters family. Their ranch prospered as Blake's innovative farming techniques and Beatrice's business acumen combined to create one of the most successful operations in the territory. Emma grew into a confident young woman with her father's sense of justice and her stepmother's resilience. Young Samuel was joined by two sisters, Charlotte, named for Blake's first wife in a gesture that touched Beatrice deeply, and Lily, whose arrival completed their family circle. Occasionally, rumors would reach them of Harrison's continuing search for his stolen property, but the man himself never appeared. Whether deterred by Blake's reputation or simply unable to track Beatrice to Colorado, the threat gradually faded into the background of their lives. The scars on Beatrice's arms remained, but as the years passed, they became just another part of her, no more defining than the laugh lines around her eyes or the silver that eventually threaded through her chestnut hair. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat together on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Blake presented Beatrice with a journal bound in soft leather. "What's this?" she asked, running her fingers over the unmarked cover. "I thought you might want to write your story," he explained. "All of it, the hardships and the happiness, so our children and their children will know where they came from and what it means to find strength in the broken places." Beatrice opened the journal to find the first page already contained a single line in Blake's careful handwriting. She was auctioned with scars on her arms, but her husband saw strength, not shame. Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes as she traced the words with her fingertip. "Our story," she whispered. Blake nodded, taking her hand in his, the same scarred hand he had held on an auction block a decade earlier, the hand that had learned to love again despite everything. "The best story I know," he said simply, "and it's still being written." As the Colorado sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Beatrice leaned against her husband's shoulder, watching their children, the living embodiment of their love and hope, and knew that no auction block, no cruel master, no scars either visible or hidden could diminish the beauty of the life they had built together. A life that had begun with a single moment of courage and compassion on a dusty street in Platteville, when a man had looked past her scars and seen the woman beneath worthy, valuable, strong. "I love you, Blake Winters," she said softly, "today and always." His arm tightened around her shoulders as he pressed a kiss to her temple. "And I love you, Beatrice Winters, more with each passing day." The scars remained, but they had become something else entirely, not marks of shame, but badges of survival. Testament to a journey that had brought her home to the arms of a man who saw her completely and loved her anyway. In the end, that was the greatest gift of all, not the absence of scars, but the presence of someone who understood that they were simply part of the map that made her who she was. Not damaged goods, but a whole woman. Not a victim, but a survivor. Not defined by her past, but by the future she had claimed for herself. And as night fell over the Colorado prairie, bringing with it the first stars of evening, Beatrice Winters opened her new journal and began to write.